O'Brien continued. The cavern was in a roar as the soft cracks of impact and their slight delay in their origin filled the room. Between him and his target, security guards of the station fought defensively as their flanks were bombarded with precise shots from members of Mamba Team. O'Brien returned fire of his own into one of the few guards that approached the cowering slaves, likely in an attempt to take them back to the building in the center of the room. It wasn't something he was willing to let them do. His shots fired true, landing squared in the chest, with a third and fourth trailing up through the neck and then finally the head. The effect was delayed, as the Toscan guard suddenly began to move sluggishly and with a clouded purpose before succumbing to blood loss. With his end, the firing had subsided as he gave a final scan of the area, but before he even thought to move from his cover, ordered his overwatch to keep a watchful eye over the building. "This is Raptor. I'm moving in to secure the Sellians. Get eyes on the building while I secure. Vorta, on me!" From what he witnessed, they seemed to thrive in operating in the dark, as they didn't really offer words of affirmation or confirmation, but attributed their attitudes simply to their field of expertise and left it at that. He made one more scan for individuals, noticing that the rest resided in the building, each scrambling around the main entrance before he decided to move to the frightened Sellians. His rifle remained leveled with his sight as his footwork glided him to their location before eventually casting a dominating shadow over them, causing them to look up. To them, they looked up at him with reservation as they analyzed every part of his body for anything that could spell danger. He had on his chest a golden painted outline of a skull unfamiliar to them, with one arm covered entirely in a similar golden brand, and a purple visor that flatly reflected their deflowered appeal. But with his presence, a short woman approached from behind in a uniform unfamiliar to them, sharing similar colors of the former, but with more pronounced tails to her uniform that draped down just below her knees, and a blackened chest plate that had written on it alien script. As she approached, Vorta lifted the veil that was her helmet and knelt down beside them as Cameron silently knelt down beside her, awaiting instructions. Her face was welcoming, as indicated by their expressions of a familiar, untouched face. "Sayarika," she greeted warmly in their ancient tongue. "My name is Vorta, and we are here to bring you home," she said with a genuine smile, causing them to tear up to her presence. She offered a nod to Cameron, who approached them slowly, eyeing their face and body individually as he began to diagnose any ailments and damage they have suffered. Ears were clipped with a plasma scalpel, not really for surgical purposes but would cause the most pain while cauterizing the cut. "Seems intentional," he replied coldly and with indifference. Vorta turned to him with desperation, before seeking O'Brien's input on the subject, to which Cameron continued his diagnoses. "Bruising and light lacerations around the legs, arms, torso, and neck. Unless I'm invasive, I can at least offer speculation on their treatment." O'Brien was acutely aware of what he meant. They were first and foremost slaves to a man who controlled an entire space station the size of a moon. It was no secret that even in situations like these, their chastity was undoubtedly sullied for however long they have been here. It was the unfortunate reality of slaves of any kind, especially for females. The very thought angered him, and he didn't have to be a member of their race to have empathy for the treatment they didn't bring upon themselves, but brought upon by those who simply cared for a profit. This was just another step to remedy that. "Mamba 4, he called out. "The 4th enlisted support from a Sellian support fleet, retrofitted with medical facilities. Maybe they can, O'Brien said, motioning towards his own ears. Vorta acknowledged his silent manner while directed her reply to the Sellians who sat quiet. "I'm sure they have replacements for you all. I hear they even have some new designs if you'd like," she suggested, easing them. "Now why don't you start by telling me your names?" They listed themselves softly while also giving the planet from where they were taken from. But as they rose from their position, the eldest, Roka, gave a bow to O'Brien and his team as personal thanks, an action he remembered Vorta and another giving long before. Before he departed for the building, Roka spoke to him for the first time. "Thank you, Trooper, but I must apologize. I don't recognize the script upon your chest, and your accent seems oddly familiar." He turned to her sloped, yet caring eyes as he answered, "You can call me Captain, ma'am. Vorta will find you some cover while my medic tends to any injuries you may suffer," he replied, deflecting any mention of exactly who he was. instead opting to focus on his mission before him. At his mention, they unconsciously grasped at their ears with a phantom pain of what was once there, but with not feeling anything in place, their expressions grew solemn. To them, it was their identity, and a point of pride for them, second only to their head adornments that had found them love and respect in the past. However, to lose one or the other was enough to shatter their spirits immensely. In a weak voice, Roka addressed the man with a realization. "You are not Celian, are you?" He shook his head to the side. "So you are like the others, a Terran." In response, she clasped her hands over her heart in a prayer. "Forgive me, Terran, but I've come to realize that you are not the savior I was expecting. Accompanied by your former enemy, no less." "You knew of the war?" he then asked, curious of her knowledge on the matter, given how long they seemed to have been enslaved themselves. She nodded. "Several years ago, many of your kind were processed through Galora. Well, rushed more like, but processed nonetheless for their exotic appearance. It was only by chance, but I spoke with a few, and needless to say, I apologize for what my kin have done to yours. Truly, I wish our kind could have met on equal terms." He took her words to heart, as it rang true, but attested to the consensus for the average individual who simply wanted to live life free from strife and war. They had been thrown to the wayside due to the incompetency of who was supposed to be their protectors. Roka continued. "You mentioned a Celian accompaniment, correct? May I ask who leads the vessel?" He returned with a shrug, where he received a notification of text referencing her question. "A Chief Commander Gruda commands the helm and is taking all survivors aboard. You'll be joining him when the main force arrives." But where he expected an attentive Celian, was instead met with a tearful Roka. Instead of saddened sobs, was actually met with a smile of endearment and joy. "So, he lives. That is good to hear." Curious, O'Brien was about to inquire the nature of her statement when a call from Sergeant Country rang through his helmet, causing him alarm. "Captain, I'm settling with Mamba 1 and 2, ready to breach. You in on this or what?" "On my way," replied O'Brien as he made his way to the main entrance. "You ready with flash nades?" His reply was linguistically unprofessional, unconsciously resorting to common slang with the sergeant. "Of course, boss. Just give the word and they'll be both deaf and dead," he replied with a smirk. Normally, when O'Brien would be addressed by a subordinate, it usually began and ended with "sir," even if they did wish to familiarize themselves with him. But eventually, they had to maintain professional courtesy between grade of rank, simply because of his rise from enlisted to officer. With this sergeant, that couldn't be further from the truth, and he welcomed it. "Then let's say hello," replied O'Brien as he stacked himself behind Mamba 1, who began their adrenaline-inducing chant. "Breach! Breach! Breach!" With a device that Mamba 2 tapped away on, the doors were forced open, and Country and Mamba 1 tossed into the space a handful of cylinders that danced against wall and floor alike, before bursting with a deafening pop and blinding light. Unlike most of his known adversaries, he rarely came across opponents with countermeasures to standard debilitating military consumables, such as grenades. The Toskans were no different, as evidenced by the sudden cries of rage that failed the corridor. "Gah! What was that?" "Blasted. My ears! Hurry, shoot, damn it, shoot!" cried another. Most likely due to their confusion of the enemy attack, they returned fire at what they thought was the front door. Whether it was by experience or prediction, the breaching team stood by idly as the enemy continued to fire until a pause presented itself between shots. It was all they needed, since Mamba 1 and N2 stormed the entrance with their weapons drawn and tight to their bodies as scoured the entry, firing precise and swift shots to their enemy. O'Brien noted the change in weaponry, seeing a resemblance to his own suppressed rifle, but found theirs with a different coloration and shorter length compared to his own. If anything, it looked like it was from another company that finally won a contract beside their tried-and-true Katak armory. They continued into the mansion, clearing each room expertly and with prejudice, often landing more shots than necessary to any one individual. But each encounter resulted in the same way every time. With expert timing and precision, the team maneuvered against their enemy like it was child's play, dodging return fire with ease and striking at their opponent's vitals as they fell lifeless. "Clear! Room clear!" sounded the two subordinates as they kept their sights trained on the lone room they had yet to check. Until now they had the advantage, their helmets' motion sensors that aided in their tactical decision-making. with the squad silently moving to where they need to be based on who was where on their mini-map. To them, it was second nature to move opposite of where a part of their team was, either covering their flanks or synchronizing the elimination of multiple enemies at once. It was a system of maneuvers they had practiced endlessly, and one they excelled at as raiders. "I got 8 on radar with 1 in the back," sounded Spears as he acknowledged his superiors behind him, while Kurt kept his eyes forward towards the room and the end of the hall. As indicated on his helmet's mini-map, there was a firing line established on the other side of the room in the form of a crescent moon, with a singular person behind them as a lone dot. Beyond that, there wasn't much more information he could detail except for the enemies. However, O'Brien had a tactical advantage up his sleeve, as his mini-map provided more than just dots on a solid background with the occasional outward ping. With his in-house upgrades, he was able to determine large furniture and walls indicated from a top-down view. "Check your fire," he spoke. "Got 2 pairs on both ends behind cover. Load FMJ. And authorization for full auto is cleared. Just watch out for the target in the rear. Looks like he's hiding behind a bed." "How the—" Spears began before being cut off by his sergeant. "How in the Lord's name did you find that out? Got that X-ray vision you don't mind sharing with us?" "Proprietary upgrades. Sorry, but no dice. Maybe if you transfer to Raptor Company, then maybe you can get a taste of what it's like with the best," retorted O'Brien. "Once I let the director know, then maybe we'll get a new shiny toy." "What, isn't your armor and weapons not enough for you?" replied O'Brien. "Sure, if it's anything within 75 meters. Hell, armor pen with this bad boy outshines even the Badger," he said, showcasing his shorter tritone rifle. "New company just made bank with this contract, so we'll see how they like our assessment," he added. With closer observation, the rifles were a dark silver, black, and accented with a dry and dark tan, with a stamp of NVG on the grip and body of their rifle and handgun, a color combo that was vastly different from the Mamba's blue, gray, red, and black armor. Without wasting any more time assessing their gear, he prepped for another breach. "All right, boys, let 'em have the rest of it," encouraged Country as the 2 frontmen prepared to unleash the rest of their debilitating grenades. When they were ready, the sergeant gave the order, "Breach, breach, breach!" Without missing a beat, Kurt tapped away on a device that forced open the door, unleashing a wave of plasma fire upon their opening. They were desperate, as the volume of fire would decrease with alternating flow, signaling to them that they reserved half to fire, and the others would wait until they had to reload. To maintain constant suppression, they alternated firing. It was effective to keep heads down, but unless you had a way to advance and hopefully destroy your enemy, then firing was useless. To minimize risk, O'Brien and his squad simply stood by as the plasma fire began scorching the wall perpendicular to their fire into charcoal, with a warm and growing glow of metal from the continuous attack. But as they suspected, they eventually stopped firing and thus began a dispatch of bright lights and eardrum slaughter. "And the Lord said, 'Let there be light,'" resounded Country with glee ever present in his voice as he tossed several flash grenades at once, each directed to a different part of the room, in addition to what his subordinates tossed. A chorus of dampened thumps reverberated through his helmet as they popped one after the other, deafening and blinding their enemy as they rushed forth and into the room. Their aim remained true and deadly, that with each pull of their trigger consigned the fate of the Tuscan guards to eternity. Unable to retaliate from severe discombobulation, Mamba Team and O'Brien made short work through the remaining enemy combatants with relative ease, which ultimately soured his mood by how quickly they cleaned house. With the fall of the last remaining guard, O'Brien let out a disappointed sigh that was heard by not only Mamba 1 and 2, but Country as well. "I hear ya. See, boys, this is what complacency gets you. Face down, drowning in a pool of your own blood," he said sternly. It was an opinion he shared himself, as their countless days' training and experience in the field that sharpened his skills to the degree that they were second nature, as if breathing. But O'Brien scanned the room for any more potential threats as the lower 2 enlisted delivered single shots to the head of their fallen enemy. He made his way to the lone dot at the end of the room with his weapon trained on the location of the bed where the dot sat still. "Grellis Brine, hands in the air and you live. Failure to comply will result in death," he ordered, waiting for the person of interest to not comply. But contrary to what he wished, 2 hands, free of any items, shot up from the edge of the bed. Beside him, the sergeant clicked his tongue in disappointment as the sign of no resistance as Grellis rose from his hiding spot, scared and shaking. You have me, all right? Don't kill me, please!" "I surrender, I beg you!" His attire was a mess, disheveled and messy, while soiled with fluids believed to be a mix of blood and urine. Thankfully for his helmet's filtration system and sealed environment, he didn't have to smell any of it. "Grellis Brine, you are under arrest and will be placed into TRSC custody," O'Brien ordered, motioning a pair of fingers toward him, which were followed by Kurt revealing a set of thick metal cuffs. He dangled them in front of the Toscan, who already seemed to know what to do, and placed his wrists together. O'Brien continued, "Before we ship you off, we need answers, and it'd be best if you don't lie to me," he said in a heavy tone. "What do you want?" The image of a man in power was nowhere to be seen, contrary to how he acted before he even knew they were there. He figured it was from seeing his entire detail be reduced to lumps of flesh and blood, told him that it was futile to resist. "The Terran slaves. You must have moved millions through here, but they're all gone, and nowhere to be found, so tell us where we can find them, and I can guarantee you'll live." His expression soured for a moment. Everything his had built and maintained had fallen in hours. He had just begun to feel its effects as he was escorted out from his home, his guards dead and riddled with holes as they all drowned beneath their own fluids, and his nose recoiled to the smell. Damn things couldn't be paid to guard a shipment of food. The disregard was apparent, not of his own failure, but by the shortcomings of his subordinates, seemingly expecting them to be the best money could buy. There wasn't a hint of reflection in his voice, but instead degraded those who sought to protect him. "You didn't answer my question." O'Brien paused, turning to the Toscan whose expression was unlike before. Unlike the one who just pleaded for his life and solid himself. "Huh? Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. All transactions made are personal to the ship's manifests. They don't enter our system directly," he said squeamishly. O'Brien understood the basics of trade, especially for illicit items, and knew well that regardless of who it was, someone kept a black book of sorts for all transactions, and an alien at the heart of their trade would be foolish to not do the same, which led him to quickly believe that he was trying to stall for time. However, he had two aces up his sleeve that could assist in his investigation. He pressed a finger to the side of his helmet, targeting Strega directly with a secure line. "Give me a sit rep now. Finished about 20 minutes ago. The Marines are cleaning up the commercial district with stragglers." "What do you need, sir?" she answered promptly. "A central database. I need whatever intel is running through this station. Double time," he said, cutting his call before directing his attention to his virtual companion. "Athena, sync up with Strega and start digging for intel now." "Of course, sir. Engaging decryption and siphon protocol routines now," she replied curtly. He then turned to the Toscan, whose expression quickly changed from his brief exchange, having heard all of it. "If you were going to do that, then what's the point of asking me?" Grellis replied, his tone free from his earlier uncertainty and feigned ignorance. His current instance was cold and indifferent. "Huh, so that's the real you," Grellis scoffed. "What, did you expect someone of my caliber to be weak?" he said, raising his restraints. "Besides, you want me alive, don't you? You'd have killed me otherwise? At least your race knows of civility." "Of course we do, intimately so," replied O'Brien, humoring the bipedal walrus of an alien. "Oh, I must admit, I was aware of your race's surprising resilience against the Sellians, but I didn't expect your skill to exceed expectations. And here I thought the Council commandos were deadly." "Enough talk, Zeno," he said, nodding head forward that prompted a swift hit from the rifle of his security detail that led him towards the central courtyard. They stood by on guard for reinforcements, when at the corner of his helmet's HUD saw a collection of two friendly indicators, followed by neutral-colored icons. It was Vorta and the medics group. "Captain," she began, "we looked them over and applied a salve over exposed cuts. As for their condition, it's going to have to wait until they're aboard one of the support ships." She paused. Her eyes were set on the silent Toscan, bound and flanked by two guards sporting armor foreign to what she was used to seeing. "I would have thought you were going to shoot him," she said in disdain, but O'Brien shrugged to her statement. "I have orders. He's to be kept alive for now." She clicked her tongue to the news and returned to the other women, who cowered from the sight of their previous master, although their reaction was relieved when they noticed his posture and restraints, cursing him endlessly until the doors of the main entrance opened. Where the slaves expected enemy reinforcements, it was quickly dismissed with the arrival of foreign agents doused in green and black, with the occasional accent of white and red adorned on their arms. As they entered, They did so with their weapons trained, each scouring the large area with their weapons, hoping for an enemy to pop out and sign their own death warrant. Covering several of them was the liquid of another, matching that of the Toscans' compatriots and subordinates. It was blood of their alien enemy, and they reveled in it. "Clear!" they shouted to each other, subsequently lowering their weapons to a relaxed position. From the large group, Vorta met one who was donned in green armor with patches of white on the forearms and greaves, with a stylized red cross, and directed them to the group of Celian slaves to be treated. While the cavern was investigated by the excess forces, a man approached O'Brien and his detail with a group of his own, offering a salute that he promptly returned. "Gunnery Sergeant Willows, sir." "Is this him?" he presented, to which his question was answered with a nod. "It's the master of the station, Grellis Brine. He's a Priority 1 escort, clear?" "Crystal, sir." He motioned with a wave of a hand, where 2 of his Marines took into their custody, the Toscan. "We'll have him moved for transport." As for the rest of the station, fire teams are moving to secure as much of the station as possible, but it's too large with the number of hands on deck. It'll get done, but don't expect it to be done too soon. "I gathered," replied O'Brien. "I have one of my raiders running through their systems for intel. Supply them with anyone you can send." "And what about the Celian relief teams? Did we get any word on them?" Willows nodded. "They landed not too long ago. Right now they're moving the captives via shuttle to their cruiser until we can clear a blockage in one of the nearby docking collars." O'Brien gathered what he could of his report before moving on. "Secure what you can, and minimize the need of prisoners unless they're of higher rank. Issue a notice to your men." He nodded with a smirk from his exposed, open-faced helmet, with only his eyes covered by a reflective material. As he readied to leave, he turned to Sergeant Country, who had just finished addressing his team. "Leaving?" asked O'Brien. He nodded. "That's right. Just got a mission update, and we have to jump now to make it on time." "Seems urgent," Country replied with a laugh. "Looks like it, and frankly I can't wait. Looks like we're going deeper, so get ready, boss, 'cause we might need you sooner than you think." He finished, before disappearing the way they had first arrived. Seeing no more reason to remain, O'Brien ordered his troops and Vorta to return to the ship, leaving the security to the countless Marines that plagued the station. Distant shots of gunfire continued to reverberate throughout the station, usually ending with the familiar sound of their standard-issue rifle reigning supreme. As he neared the hangar expecting to find Prowler, his helmet rang from a familiar voice to 2 individuals, first beginning with Strega. "Sir, I found what we were looking for," she started, followed in sync by Athena. "The enemy was in the middle of their attempt to erase the data, but it would appear they have a system in place that prevents a complete wipe unless all the data was removed. We were able to stop it and recover the data, but there was something else." Strega resumed her place in the conversation without missing a beat. "We isolated an outgoing signal that ran parallel to the deletion sequence. Whatever it was, looks like they were also trying to transfer data, which is why their initial sequence was slow." But O'Brien recalled a moment during his eavesdropping on the unsuspecting Grellis that his fleet was successful in jamming most signals, including the interference Country and his team conducted. "I was aware we jammed all signals, even the new tech they recently installed," he said adamantly, but her revelation didn't do much to ease his growing unease. "We found evidence of removal, but it looks like there was a redundancy in place. Seems like whatever they took out reduced the capability, but not completely. Whatever it is, I'll bring it aboard for study." He was unsure if it was the right move to bring it along, but his confidence in both Athena and Strega outweighed what worry he had. "Granted. Meet me in the hangar and prep for RTB." His helmet grew quiet once more before being invaded by its second resident. "I understand you wish for time to rest, but you have a secure line request from Commander Wolf." "Is it urgent?" he asked, wondering if the topic was going to be work or of a different pressing matter. Luckily, when her voice rang through his ears, he felt like his stress had vanished. "Faye, how was it?" "Is everything fine?" He smiled beneath his helmet as he answered, but let slip his joy to the sound of her voice. "More than fine, now that I get to hear you again." She paused before resuming. "Ahem, let's not get sidetracked here, but I heard you took into custody the target?" "I did. Passed it off to a Gunnery Sergeant Willows, if you know him." "Barely, but he's one of my top security officers, and he keeps the peace aboard my ship. But that's not what I'm here for. Unfortunately, Hire isn't keen on us getting rest anytime soon, and they pushed an advanced scouting mission to trail behind the Mamba team. Said that they'll pick out targets for us to hit en route to their next objective. O'Brien grumbled, but held his tongue. You coming with, or are we going radio silent again? She sighed deeply. The latter, I'm afraid. But, she paused. They did give a reprieve of 72 hours before the next mission, she said with heavy implication. As he mulled over her words, his ship landed in preparation for departure as his team was beginning to reassemble from their mission. Not wanting to skip this moment, he decided to buy himself some time. Athena, patch me to Commander Knight. The transition was instant, as he didn't even attempt to disconnect the call with Zuna, instead opting to keep her online. Hearing this, she silenced herself as Knight answered the call. This is Reaper Actual. Raptor, give me a sit rep. Without delay, O'Brien answered with his findings of the Toscan's data erasure attempt, the mysterious communication device, and the Toscan in question. But the moment of truth arrived upon his brief retelling of events. Commander Wolf has notified me of a 72-hour reprieve before the next mission set, and I think this would be the perfect time to interrogate the captive for intel. There was a pause which began to draw unnaturally long for his liking, but eventually Knight returned with his affirmation. I just had to reconfirm, but it looks like HQ did authorize such an order, even with the use of the station docks if it's clear of hostiles. That's no problem, sir. The Marines are making excellent time, to which Knight offered a grunt of affirmation to his report. Understood. Maintain a duty patrol rotation of 12 hours, and they're free to use this time to rest if the area is clear of threats. Reaper out. Silence followed before he gave his answer that granted her nothing but joy to hear. I'll see you in 5. He then ended the call as she had nothing else to say, before turning to his squad leaders who stood by, awaiting his orders. He told them of their newfound liberty, albeit restricted to patrol, but it was something they were willing to do to be free from the ship. As such, they cordoned off a section of the hangar for themselves, using time to rest as his sergeants organized a rotating patrol roster in exchange for rest aboard the ship. Seeing them ready to tend to their new task, O'Brien boarded the ship alone, leaving the duties of supervision to Strega and Grayson. But before he could order Prowler to take off, an oblivious Vorta beckoned his attention. If you don't mind me asking, what exactly is happening? Recalling his most recent conversation, he told her of their duty before remembering a conversation he had with Zuna before their assault on the station. Recalling how she wished to meet his colleague, he mulled over it, expecting the worst, but assumed she only wanted to ensure that his heart remained to her, of which he was certain. So, you coming or what? However, he figured now was the best time to get the two to meet, and ordered Prowler to leave for the Phantom Queen as his personal taxi.